Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Attendance Bias. I'm your host, Brian Weinstein. This week's guest is trumpet player Mike Lowe. Mike plays for two DC-based bands, Skyscrapers, and he also plays for the Monumental Brass Quintet. As far as Skyscrapers, when Mike's band started playing their first gigs and really getting their sound together as indie jam rock, unfortunately, COVID hit, and the band had to take a forced hiatus from the stage. But as you'll hear Mike say today, they're getting ready for a return to the U Street bars in Washington, D.C., and they also have a lot of music available online, and the links to those sources will be posted in today's show notes. For today's episode, Mike picked a really big monster jam. He chose Fluffhead from July 24th, 1999 at Alpine Valley. Indeed, this version of Fluffhead is unlike any other that the band has ever played before or since. It's stretched for over 32 minutes with a Type 2 jam that is almost entirely led by Mike's bass. The band has yet to play a version that displays an equal amount of musical creativity compared to this one. Toward the end of our discussion, the only parallel that I could think of would be The Baker's Dozen Lawn Boy, in terms of having a song that, for as enjoyable as it may be, the audience pretty much knows what to expect each time. In both The Baker's Dozen Lawn Boy and this version of Fluffhead, all those expectations went right out the window and went above and beyond anybody's expectations. Mike chose it because he describes how fans had their jaws dropped to the floor after it was played. More than that, it was only the second song of the whole show, so there's a lot to unpack in this Fluffhead. So let's join Mike to talk about his band Skyscrapers, Phish's sound in 1998, and Fluffhead from July 24th, 1999 at Alpine Valley.
Let's meet today's guest.
Mike, welcome to Attendance Bias. Thanks for being here.
Oh, no problem. It's great to be here.
It's good to have you. I am very excited to talk about today's Fluffhead from July 24th, 1999 at Alpine Valley for a number of reasons. First off, it's a great jam before anything else. Second, when I was first getting into Phish, this was the stuff of legend. It was soon after I got into the band, and I heard all about it. It was in the Farmer's Almanac. I read up on it. People who were there would tell me about it. But at the time, it was so hard to track down tapes and recordings from 1999. So this one has passed me by. And now you just helped me check this one off my list. So thank you from fan to fan.
Awesome. No, that really makes me happy.
You're from Virginia. And before we get to the Phish part, you are in a band called Skyscraper. Tell us a little bit about Skyscraper.
Yeah, Skyscrapers is a band. It's kind of funny. It's a band that was sort of happened via Twitter. And my friend Jimmy Timbercarini on Twitter had been living in California and was relocating to the East Coast. And we'd sort of been talking about, hey, we should start a band sometime. He had been in a Talking Heads cover band out there. And it took a little while, but sure enough, we did start a band in DC. And Matt Dwyer, Maryland Funk on Twitter, also plays guitar in the band and works for Osiris and that kind of thing too. And we also have a drummer, keyboard, and who am I forgetting? Oh, bass, of course, and myself.
Bass player is always getting forgotten.
Yeah. So originally, the concept was to have sort of a mini horn section, and for our first few rehearsals, we had a trombone player and myself sort of playing off each other. But over the last couple of years, it's basically just been me, and maybe at some point we add another horn player. I think it would be it's fun, but either way, I'm sort of bouncing ideas off of Jimmy, who's playing lead guitar, and he does a lot of the writing. We probably, rehearsed for like 2 years before we actually played a gig. And we were just starting to get going, in early 2019 and had played a few shows in DC down on U Street. And we're just, there was a little bit of buzz and we were being asked back to play again. And then everything, the plug got pulled, but we've got about 8 to 10 originals. And I would say, the easiest way to describe our sound is probably a combination of the National meets the War on Drugs meets a little bit of Talking Heads and TV on the radio. And so it's sort of like an indie jam in a way, but we do actually play structured songs. I think at points lyrics are important and at other times they're not. So, a lot of our covers are Talking Heads and we do Golden Age, for example, and Life During Wartime. We just played Cities actually just Saturday. That's sort of like a nutshell, like sort of what the influences are in the band. And we do like to sort of keep it open. We like to sort of drop down into Lydian or like down a minor third and jam like Phish does, basically, for example, in Golden Age. And in this Fluffhead, to be honest, there's a point where they do finally modulate and I think and change key. So we're looking forward to sort of getting back out and playing again. This was our only show this past weekend until probably the fall, where we'll hopefully be back in the club scene and, continue the progress and upward trajectory of the band.
Well, you mentioned that you're in kind of the DC area. What are some possible venues that people might see you?
So I'd look for us at the Black Cat. I'd look for us at Union Stage, the Velvet Lounge, which is the place we played a couple times now on U Street. Hopefully bigger stages after that. But I think I would say that, some more of the smaller stages, especially, like I said, Union Stage, for example, is one we're definitely interested in. The Black Cat would be one that is sort of a dream for all of us. It's like one of the big four in DC, I would say, between Merriweather, 930, the Anthem, and Black Cat. We're at Skyscrapers DC on Twitter.
Attendance bias lightning round.
All right, Mike, let's get to know you a little bit as a fan with the attendance bias lightning round.
Cool.
So first up, Mike, when was your first Phish show?
My first Phish show was August 8th, 1997 at the World Amphitheater, otherwise known as Tinley Park in Chicago. It was not a great show. I've been told by other friends it was probably the weakest show of the summer tour. But for me personally, it was one of the first moments that really pulled me into the band was right off the bat in that show. They played a gumbo into Lizards early in the first set.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah, and the gumbo was a 17, 18-minute variety. So it's and then also an excellent Wolfman's Brother to open the second set. I think it went into free, possibly. And then they had a harmonica player, Sugar Blue, come out and do encores, Messing with the Kid, and I can't remember, Hoochie Coochie Man, I think.
Oh, beautiful. I remember reading those notes, those J-card notes. I just couldn't recall it right away. Tinley Park, as bad a venue as I've heard, or the sound at least.
It's overall, it's probably in the top 3 of the worst venues I've ever been to. From the parking lot, which is, just chaotic. And I just remember it being really hot that day too. It was on August. The sound is terrible. The stage itself doesn't really deliver. Fortunately, I remember being pretty center, not in the pavilion, but close to the edge of it. So it didn't bother me too much, but compared to the other venues I'd been to, looking back, it was terrible.
What was your most recent Phish show?
My last Phish show was December 30th, 2019 at MSG.
All things considered, what's your favorite song?
Ooh, man, this is such a hard question for me. I think probably my favorite song, it's probably Bathtub Gin, to be honest. It's the song that, for me as a trumpet player, is the easiest to play along with. It has a really cool melody. And then it's a song that I played with other musicians, sort of, going back to my time at Northwestern. We would have jam sessions on the rocks on Lake Michigan. Andrew Hitz was included in that.
Oh, fun.
And frequently that song would be played. I also played it at my wedding. So, which was in May of 2004, about a week after they announced that they were taking a break. So it sort of has a lot of sentimental value. I'm a huge fan of Tweezer. It's really hard for me not to say that, but my heart probably says Bathtub Gin.
We just talked about Tinley Park as being a bottom 3 venue. What's your top venue?
Man, I would probably say Hampton or Madison Square Garden. Those are the 2 venues that I've seen the most shows, as it turns out, as well as Merriweather. It's really interesting to hear what they've done with the renovations at Merriweather. I think the sound in there really pops now. It's just a whole nother feel inside the pavilion.
Are you chasing any songs?
Oh yeah.
If you could push a button and see a show tomorrow and see any song you want, what's the number one that you're chasing then?
Peaches and Regalia.
Any songs that are chasing you?
There was a period in time in the 99, 2000 where I feel like I was seeing rock and roll every show. And at one point I remember looking at my stats and I was like in the 50-50 club, like had seen 50% of them. at that point.
Wow.
It only played like 15 or 16 of them, but that was the point where I was like, golly, they're just playing this thing every time I'm here. That sort of faded, and I don't know if I've got the same. I can't think of another song that's sort of in sync with like that, but that was a period where it was like, geez, here we go.
Do you have a favorite year of Phish?
Probably, it's also such a hard question. I think overall it probably is 98. I feel like it's a great blend of what they were doing in 97 and it's sort of a precursor to what sort of happened in 99, where 98, they were adding more ambient and space to it, but the playing itself was very, very clean and tight. And there was no, back in those days, I remember never having a thought about, is Trey going to miss a note here or something like that. It was just a different, experience, I think, at the show. But 98, 99 is probably my guess. I love 97. I love, of course, summer and fall of 95.
I had that thought today about 98. You mentioned that it's possibly your favorite year. I think that 1998 it's got something for everybody. No matter what you like about Phish, it's somewhere in there. Whether, like you said, it's like a little bit of ambience, but it's not too much of it. Like you might find in 2000, for example. There's weird covers, especially in the summer.
That's right. The summer of covers.
Right.
It was like every show there was something. And then I feel like it's probably my favorite Halloween in terms of how the band was actually playing. That Velvet Underground, and I was also just getting into the Velvet Underground, which is sort of why it's funny that rock and roll ended up following me around. I just discovered that album that year. So then to see Phish in 99 and 2000 and hearing that song, what felt like every show, was a little weird.
Final question of the lightning round. What is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
Getting a bouquet given to me at New Year's 98 from one of the nymph dancers.
Oh, that's fun. For anyone who's not listening, there's not, at least I haven't found a lot of video footage of this or even photographs. 98 didn't even really have a gag, like a New Year's gag. No. Right? The closest is that they opened New Year's with 1999 by Prince, but they didn't have a build up at midnight. I went to the first 3 shows of that run, the 28th, 29th, and 30th. I could not get New Year's tickets.
Yep.
But throughout the first 3 nights, they had like fairy dancers. They had worms, I believe, like people dressed as giant worms kind of gyrating around the stage on different nights. My impression was that since it was Madison Square Garden, that it was a garden, almost like a Midsummer Night's Dream, or like this garden of pleasantries where there are strange, perhaps fantastical characters and elements in it, but it didn't build to anything. But you got a bouquet of flowers from one of them?
It was weird. No, we, I think, just to jog your memory, I recall that that was the time like where the floor at the garden was full of chairs. And it was not open, and there wasn't the back row, bleachers that there are today behind the soundboard and all that. And I remember sitting in basically a center front row between the aisle at the aisle. And so we were right in front of where that action was happening in the middle of the room. And one of them on stilts handed me one of these weird white bouquets of something or other. And it was I was into the music, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what is this?
When was this show played?
Let's get into the context of this Fluffhead from July 24th, 1999 at Alpine Valley. It was played toward the end of the 99 summer tour. It was about a little less than a week after Oswego. This show was a single night at Alpine before 2 nights at Deer Creek to close the whole tour. I've never been to Alpine Valley, ever. And I've heard a billion stories about it. It lives in my mind's eye for sure. What is your impression of the venue being from the Midwest?
So this was actually my first show at Alpine Valley. My impression of it, the only thing I remember is it was incredibly hot this day. And it was like 100+ degrees in the venue. And so water was like the number one premium. But what I remember about it is a giant lawn, a hill on the top of the lawn, a ski lift behind the stage off in the distance, and a giant tree in the middle, sort of halfway up the lawn. that, people would climb at times, and it was part of the lawn, more or less. But the main thing is, I sort of remember it's all like a funnel. And so everybody gets pushed down close to the pavilion. So it's really tight on the lawn. For example, you're shoulder to shoulder. At the time, I don't think that security was quite as intense up there as it's become. From what I'm hearing in 3.0, it's not nearly as sort of relaxed and open, especially getting into the show. But I remember Mike was wearing a bright green lime shirt this night.
Of course he was.
Yeah. So to be honest, it sounded, the band, listening to the whole show, this is one of the weirdest overall shows I've probably ever been to outside of 73003. It's sort of in that category for me of just strangeness. Terms of the playing.
And Summer 99 has been a very popular tour for guests on Attendance Bias to choose. That surprised me. Before starting this podcast, I didn't know much about this tour at all. I didn't see any shows from it, but I think by this point, I think I've said everything I can possibly say about Summer 99. So I want to ask your impressions of it. How many shows did you see on this tour?
I saw 12, and I saw shows starting in Charlotte, and did Charlotte, Virginia Beach, Meriwether, Camden, Great Woods, took a break, and then went out to the Midwest for Alpine and Deer Creek. For me, this was like my first tour in a lot of ways. My first, as I did 98, in the winter time. I did the UIC run in 98, being in Chicago, and then MSG. But this was my first summer tour, like doing multiple shows and being on the road. So that part of it was also part of my experience.
And how old are you at this time?
So I had just graduated from college. So I was like 22, 23. So I graduated summer of 95. And, another side note about this show is that they played Alumni Blues as the encore a month after my graduation. So
perfect. They knew you were there.
Yeah, it seemed like a really fitting end to the show. But, overall, I just felt like the band had a different sound. Looking back now, it's because of the Sick at Disc, and that sort of not infected, but was sort of involved in all of the jams they were doing. And My Left Toe was sort of a big part of that. And it sort of happened from the beginning. From when I saw shows in Charlotte, they did a big My Left Toe in a Giant 2001, where there's just a lot of space in the sound, maybe not a lot of lead from Trey, and he had the I believe he also had the side keyboard going on at that time. That was sort of his little side party from the mini kit,
and that carried over into the fall tour and became a lot more pronounced.
It really did, and that they got more droney as it went along, and you had songs like Got a Jaboo and Sand start to enter the mix and second sets. In a way, for me, it seemed, as a musician, it seemed like these are perfect songs for them right now. They don't even need to practice these, because I remember hearing about the rule in 98 about the no practice.
I think they took that to heart. Yeah,
I really do. I do. Yeah. And so some of this just sort of lets it, Mike doesn't get to, he's sort of, playing the Tony bass lines, repetitive, groove, minimalist style, but
it can have its benefits, but also its drawbacks. Luckily, in this jam that you picked today, it's got its benefits. But this song that you chose, Fluffhead, this was the second song of the show, right after Gaiute opens it. Right. I mean, aside from Hampton in 2009 of Fluffhead opening the show famously, this was extremely uncharacteristic for Fluffhead to be played at all. I think it was played 7 times or something like that in 1999, to come right as the 2-hitter. Yeah, I mean, that's mind-blowing. I can't imagine what the crowd reaction was so early in the show. Do you have any memory of it, or was it too long ago?
I just remember people just sort of being electric, this, instant cheering. The Gaiute opener was sort of more of a ho-hum, Here we go. It's more of the farmhouse stuff. And for me personally, I had just gotten my first Fluffhead in Camden on the 10th. And that was a really good one that Trey had a really hard time ending. In a way, it just kept building and building and building. So when they started the Fluffhead again, my jaw hit the floor. I just couldn't believe I was hearing this again. And I think we talked about, but right off the jump, it's different. You can tell something is brewing, basically, because of the extended intro and waiting to come in. I think it's an extra 8 bars that they add.
Yeah, we'll get into it in a second.
Yeah,
I noticed
sure,
right
so-
away. I do just want to say before we get into Fluffhead itself, for anyone listening that you haven't heard of or heard this show, July 24th, 99, the first thing that I saw when Mike gave me this date is that when you look at it on either fish.net or fish.in, this show has a 5-song first set and a 4-song second set
So
and a
weird.
4-song encore.
So weird.
It looks like a random set list generator that ran out of time.
Yep.
Isn't
Yep.
it? It's unbelievable. So before we get into the song itself, let me ask you, why did you pick it?
I just felt like this was, so unique. I can't think of another time in their history where they've done an extended sort of type 2 jam on Fluffhead. The other thing was, it was sort of, as listening back, I just hearing lots of other connections to 99 and Big Cypress, which was sort of coming up in the jam itself, some sort of foreshadowing of where the band was heading.
So as you mentioned, right away, you could notice there's something different about this one.
Yep.
I listened to this jam for the first time, as I do when I walk my dog. And I noticed by 1 minute, I think it was, something is different already. Like they don't come in at the usual time. Like you mentioned before, you
Right.
said that they vamp for about 8 extra times before Trey comes in or everyone comes in with the lyrics. I counted it. It's about 40 seconds more than usual,
Yeah.
which, in day-to-day timing, that's not a lot, 40 seconds. But when you're waiting, like when you're at a Phish show, 40
Wait.
seconds could be the world. And you could hear the whole crowd start singing,
Yep.
expecting, to sing along with the band, but the band doesn't join in when they do.
It's like they created accidental tension, in a
Mhm.
way. I was noticing too, I don't know if this had anything to do with it whatsoever, but when Mike first came in, he sort of flubbed it.
Oh, really? I didn't notice.
His first entrance was a little bit weird, and I almost feel like Trey was giving him a chance to sort of get, centered again and straight. I'm not really sure. This is just a guess, but I just listened to it again this afternoon and was just like, oh, it's not sort of a clean sort of entrance from Mike. And I'm not sure if that sort of fed the direction that they were, thinking about and playing at that point. But anyway, as we'll talk about, he's sort of prominently featured and seems to be driving the whole jam.
Yeah, from section to section, that doesn't let up.
Nope.
And so for most of the track, at least for most of the song, I thought this is a pretty typical Fluffhead as we know it. Some extra energy perhaps, but I think anyone could say that about any version that they're listening to for any given reason. It is Fluffhead after all.
Right.
But around 13 and a half or maybe 14 minutes, there's some really extra energy when they come back in to the chorus when they, Fluffhead. Trey keeps his sustain of his vocals on. He just sings right through.
Yep.
He doesn't stop. And it's a small detail. It's something that, not everyone might notice or that you could easily pass you by. but you could tell that they're on a mission. Like he has a purpose. Like he has some real hard energy going there. The guitar solo I wrote down was more soulful than usual, and I was inspired. It broke free. You could almost picture it breaking free from a mold.
Right. Yeah, no, I had notes about, 1320 is when they have a big arrival, a huge peak. And then about 1335 or so, Trey is just soaring on his solo. And listening back, it almost sounds like Tila at times, like what he's playing. And there's a lot of notes happening. And yeah, you sort of kept this is sustain on as well. And it just keeps going, 14 minutes and then 15, it's like another arrival. And I start to hear some weird, I don't know if you heard this too, about 15 minutes, just right after that, I hear Mike does a little, a chromatic half step drop in the bass line.
Yeah, I wrote, you could hear the beginnings of the improv jam from Mike's incredible bass runs.
Yeah, so it's like he hits this little descending lead and he goes down a half a step and then he starts this whole upbeat, like synco bass into the next arrival, the boop, 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 boop. It's like playing on the upbeat and then it syncs up with them hitting the next, which I have as the final sort of, well, there's maybe two more. Like this is the thing about this, they kept arriving. There were like 4 or 5 like actual arrival points. This was one they just kept going, and I sort of, what I said about Mike is that he plays the exact same bass line at like 16-14. I've got like 16-24 is when the actual sort of type 2 jam starts.
Yeah, I wrote around the same time that this is where everything changes.
Oh, totally.
It's unlike any other Fluffhead that I've ever heard, or as far as I know that they've ever played before. There's like a 1999 drone guitar, but upon re-listens, it's not even a drone. Trey just kind of takes a step back, and he's not as audible as he normally is, and Mike is really keeping the melody moving forward. I even heard flavors of Sunshine of Your Love by Cream, even though it doesn't really sound like that.
Right.
There's kind of a mold of it, or there's like a flavor of it.
Yeah, the group sound basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I even put down here like so they have this pattern, like, and they sort of enter this, I think, around 18 minutes. Phish has a tendency to do like a 4 or an 8 bar phrase, like in the jam. So you can hear them, you can count to 4 times, basically. Do this with the Nassau Roses Are Free, for example. It's really clear in that. But they started happening, that pattern sort of emerged in this Fluffhead too. And it almost sounded for a moment, it was like a slow Psycho Killer from Trey. You hear all kinds of teases, all the time from this band, but But yeah, I totally agree. It was like he backs up, and I feel like he starts to stress a lot more the enharmonics on the guitar, like the higher twinkly notes, and he's not really playing in the low end. And then he's sort of, there's all these loops going on. This is something that sort of disappeared from his playing now, that was really present then. The loops and all of that sort of atmosphere he created to play inside.
And I agree with you. Around 18 minutes, Mike really becomes the go-to guy. Totally. That he will remain for the rest of this jam. And a minute later, around 20 minutes, there's the space funk that's very similar to their bread and butter on Winter 99, but things got a little bit more weird and out there.
So at 20 minutes, on my note, I wrote Boise Bag. Mm-hmm. Yep. There's a lot of sort of similarities in the sound to what was then going to be happening in that jam later in the fall. There just starts to be some convergence. Like for me, the big ones in '99 were the Camden Chalk Dust, the Virginia Beach Free, and then the Big Cypress Split Up in a Melt. Sort of had a lot of this similar sort of sound happening from the band, where it's all headed in one direction. It's all straightforward and driving at times, but also nebulous and spacey and weird,
which is fun because just a couple days later, a week earlier at Oswego, they're playing at supersonic speeds on Piper, which is just like straight ahead insane guitar rock. Right, and now you're on a completely different galaxy.
Totally different thing. Yeah, exactly. And I think we had mentioned this sort of off mic, but my ears for this whole jam, I really wasn't connected to what Page was doing much. I was hearing sort of Mike being dominant, Trey playing, and Fishman sort of playing off of him and being pretty active, and it might just be the miking situation. It might be the odds of the summer.
I think it is. I think Page gets lost in the mix in a lot of these shows, a lot of these recordings. You mentioned Alpine Valley as a very small pavilion, but a very wide kind of venue overall. Yeah. I had the same experience at Darien Lake in 2000, where it's very washy. The sound can become very washy very quickly. Yep. And then when you add microphones to it, that it's not just straight noise or straight sound from the speakers to your ears, there's so much that gets lost in between. This was a hard time to get a good recording.
Yeah. So, I mean, and, I mentioned Page because I did become very aware of him about 21 minutes plus when he starts to get involved. Page and Trey are both sort of jumping. I think Page jumps on clavs.
Yes, I wrote that too.
Starts pounding away, and all of a sudden it sounds like sand, like they're playing a sand jam for, sort of the Cypress tiles. That's what was in my head. It was just sort of this very similar. Again, we're now in another sort of flavor of our new style, basically. And then, it's sort of, I wrote finally Page, and, and then the final build of the last 4 minutes, I think Page sort of ignites that, about 8 minutes out.
I wrote that it's impossible to remember that this is from Fluffhead.
No.
By this time, we're completely in a different house, a different galaxy, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
We are no longer with Fluffhead. If there's a carrot that says Fluffhead Segway Jam, this is Jam. Yep.
So,
we have exited. Fluffhead has left the building.
Right. And if I was like 20 minutes to 24 minutes is more of like the, the fall sort of 99 sound that's coming up. 24 minutes, that turns into sand and more chunky funk, and even a little bit of ghost, I think, is sort of implied in some of that. It's just complete, 4 minutes later, we're in another universe, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote Fluffhead is a lot of things, but it's not groovy.
No.
But this is groovy. This is super groovy. This is, I wrote down, not on my notes, but just in my head, proto Plinko.
Yeah.
And I want to put that on a shirt. I might get a tattoo that just says proto Plinko,
That's
$724.99.
I like that idea a lot.
But Trey, he gets dissonant. He kind of takes a back seat. There's really no melody to be spoken of or to be heard. Mike has the call to step up. It's kind of on him to do it. And he sure answers that call. It sounds like the Winter Tour and Big Cypress are written all over this jam, or vice versa.
But I think it's really interesting what you say about just him taking a back seat at times and allowing for Mike, for example, to step up and fill that space, And I remember some of my friends at the time weren't necessarily thrilled that he's not playing enough leads. For example, he's playing sort of more rhythm guitar, and in the background, it's like, well, it's sort of a democracy at the same. You're allowing someone else to come up more and sort of inspire the action at that moment.
I have to say, I've never heard anyone, or even a story of anyone, complaining about Phish in that Trey doesn't play enough leads. That's the only time I've ever heard that one.
That was I think that can also come back up in like earlier 3.0. I think when they're trying to find their sound again, I think there's maybe a little bit more of the truth to that at that time. But yeah, no, I agree with you.
And at around 30 minutes, the last couple of minutes, it kind of settles into what I heard as Boogie on Reggae Woman, at least from Fishman on the drum beat, like very tight hi-hat, syncopated hi-hat and snare drum beats. And then
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, and then it just beautifully fades out and fades in. It's like a beautiful crossfade if you were mastering an audio file from this weird groove. I hesitate to even call it Fluffhead, into The Man Who Stepped Into Yesterday. It couldn't have been done better. It
was a perfect landing spot in terms of just juxtaposing those two ideas together and overlapping them, as you said. And it's interesting you say Boogie and Reggae Women. That last little sort of section of the jam, like 24 minutes out, when Page sort of exerts himself a little bit more, so does Fishman. He changes the beat right there and immediately is much more up on the hi-hat and sort of up on top, on the upbeat of the beat, sort of changes. And that definitely sort of is a Boogie on Reggae Women type of a groove for sure. So totally agree on that. I remember just when they did finally get into the Man, it just felt like this huge exhale from the crowd.
The closest analogy, or the closest, I guess, parallel that I could think of for this track would be the Baker's Dozen Lawn Boy. This time it would be Is It Still Fluffhead?
Right.
Where it's this song that is, as you mentioned, very well composed. You kind of know what you're getting. It's great. You have no complaints about it, but you know what you're getting. You know what to expect. And then they blow that wide open. And just like the Baker's Dozen Lawn Boy, this lasts a half hour.
Yeah. Yes. That's a really cool parallel. I hadn't thought about that one, but that's totally right. And that sort of, one of these classic moments, it's just, getting the unexpected, happening at a show. When you're definitely expecting one thing, and then they totally flip it upside down on you, basically.
So Mike Lowe, thanks so much for being here on Attendance Bias today. Before we check out, remind us again of your band, where we could find you, where we could hope to see you sooner than later. Fingers crossed.
My band is Skyscrapers DC. Look for us in the fall. We will be back. We're writing new music this summer. We'll be back at it. Look for us at hopefully the Black Cat and other clubs around U Street. I also play in a brass quintet called Monumental Brass, and we do all your more legit style music as well. So, it was a pleasure being on. Thanks again, Brian.
And that's it for today's episode of Attendance Bias. I'd like to thank Mike Lowe for joining me today to talk about that unbelievable version of Fluffhead. I'd also like to thank Phish.net for everything they do, and Fishin, Fish.in, for the recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by leaving a rating and a review of the show on your favorite podcast app. Also, find Attendance Bias on social media, reach out, and I'll send you a free sticker. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next week on Attendance Bias.